Welcome to an hour of HealthMade Radio. HealthMade is a community for natural health seekers where we educate people about common health conditions and share extensive research on the most effective natural health treatments and promote legislation that protects our health freedoms. A core concept belief is in the innate intelligence and healing power of the body, and if properly supported spiritually, emotionally, and nutritionally, it can find its way back to health. HealthMade Radio will bring information from integrative health experts throughout the world. Check us out at healthmade.co. Health is what you make it. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt, and I will be your host. Today's guest is Dr. Ruth Richards. She's one of the leading researchers on creativity in daily life, is a distinguished educational psychologist and board-certified psychiatrist. As professor of psychology at Saybrook University in the College of Social Sciences, she specializes in the area of consciousness, spirituality, integrative health, and creative studies. Many years ago, before she went on to earn a medical degree from Harvard and a PhD from UC Berkeley, she was studying to become a high school teacher. While taking a required psychology class, a discussion about diagnostic tests led to a light bulb life-changing moment when she realized that it was possible to come up with profoundly creative ways to answer even standardized questions. That creativity, even in such a mundane situation, was real and could be studied. She has researched creativity in educational, clinical, social action, and spiritual contexts, as well as issues in aesthetics and awareness, consciousness studies, and chaos and complexity theories. Dr. Richards has authored numerous papers and chapters and a monograph, and has co-edited 2 books, Eminent Creativity, Everyday Creativity, and Health and Everyday Creativity, and New Views of Human Nature, Psychological and Spiritual Perspectives. She authored Everyday Creativity, Coping and Thriving in the 21st Century, and is currently co-editing Non-Linear Psychology, Keys to Chaos and Creativity in Mind and Life. She was also principal investigator and co-author for the Lifetime Creativity Scales. Dr. Richards is on editorial boards for both the Creativity Research Journal and the Journal of Humanistic Psychology. As a fellow of the American Psychological Association, she was the 2009 recipient of the Rudolf Arnheim Award for Outstanding Lifetime Achievement in Psychology and the Arts. Among her many interests is a concern for whether the everyday creative process can bring each of us as a creative person to greater health and purpose by offering new ways to present with others, ourselves, our larger world, and life's possibilities. Her newest book, Everyday Creativity and the Healthy Mind, won the Silver Award and Nautilus Book Awards for 2018 Creative Process, which it's an incredible book. I had the opportunity of reading it this weekend, and it was pretty amazing the different concept that was presented in the book. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show today, Dr. Ruth Richards.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate being here.
And I know you had a little excerpt that you wanted to kind of start reading to kind of set the stage for the interview.
I would like to. Thank you for that. And let me just also add that although people are aware of many things they can do that have healing powers for them at different levels, I think often it's a surprise for folks to learn that being creative can be a big one, and for reasons we'll discuss. So it's like one of our best medicines. That's much more.
Fascinating.
Okay. Yeah. But really a big surprise to people who think it's all about art, or it's all about, nothing wrong with that, or all about writing a novel and only for certain famous people. And that's not it. We're talking about process and a way of life which is for everyone and has probably been very important in human evolution so far, and hopefully will be important in where we go next. I did want to read from early in this book a vignette, which is, well, it's better if I say after what it was about, I guess. But this is an event, as I say in the book, that stopped me cold. And I do think back to this, let me add, a lot, as I realize how much we, all of us, miss every moment we make choices of some tiny little slice of the manifest world that we're going to pay attention to, usually not consciously. Plus, we think it's the whole thing. Okay, here's the vignette. I'm rather good at maps. I'm also good at using a GPS device, but I forgot the maps, and here we were, late afternoon, last day of vacation, my daughter, my cousin, and I driving along a 2-lane highway in mid-state Oregon. No other car in sight, and the sun had just gone down. Where was that charming little village? It was supposed to be right along this river. We drove on farther and farther into the unknown. River always at left as our guide. We kept passing farms and fields and scattered houses. And now a few lights were coming out. In my head, I was doing a litany of self-criticism. Why didn't we start earlier, leave more time, have lunch sooner, save dessert for the little town, bring the map, and on and on and on, a list of all we did wrong, reliving it as if that could help us now. My cousin and I were both impatient and stressed. My daughter, at least, was happy in the back seat, text messaging a friend. I pull up on the shoulder of the road to think. Just then, wow, amazing, a new scene had appeared. A new slide projected on a screen. Where did it come from? Look, I insisted. Even my daughter looked up. Right there, out of nowhere, a magical, misty landscape. Fields moving off to infinity in muted purples and pastels. Fuzzy in the haze with clusters of tall, lush trees, darkening and receding in the dusk. I turned the car engine off. All was silent in the hot summer air. Beside us, a plum-colored river barely moved between a border of trees, its dark, lazy water reflecting the last light of day. How breathtaking! This landscape had cast a spell. We sat in the silence of an indrawn breath. Where had it been? If I'd seen even a trace of this beauty while driving along, not a neuron had registered it. No mental bell had rung so that the conscious mind could stop and take a look. I'd missed it all. We all had missed it. We miss a lot. Almost everything, in fact, in our world. Our task-focused filters take care of that, selecting only what we need. We need to get to work, have some lunch, find that report, water the garden, go out on a date. We see what we need to see, often for purposes of survival or survival of the species. Gregory Bateson, speaking of beauty, said aesthetic judgment is selection of a fact. We create the sight even as we become conscious of it. We do not simply see it. In our daily lives, who or what is doing the selecting and why? Is this predetermined? Can we, in the here and now, make a change? Can we see further? Can we see better? Can we even better our world? Opening our vision is the first step in everyday creativity. Thank you. I think back to that and I'm like, whoa, what am I missing right now? Everything else.
Yeah, exactly. And that speaks so much about, that really frames your book, talking about how, because you're in that's you talk about chaos theory in the book and how all of a sudden something emerges, that aha moment, like that village, and it emerges out of seemingly nothing, but it is still, it's the openness, it's the looking, it's the intention, and then all of a sudden it is there, and you have really no idea how it came about. It's as if the aha moment just was created by itself.
Let me add to that. That was very nice. That we may not be able to determine, what the next amazing sight will be, but there are ways that we can make them more likely, such as being open, being aware as opposed to, being mindful as opposed to mindless.
Exactly.
In the present moment. I think, quite honestly, I think my cousin and I, neither of us were all that present to anything, except, with all apologies to her if she's listening, but, we were both saying, is that the sign? Is this where we turn? No, it should have been back there. Stuff like that, right?
Well, we're going to take a quick little break, and we'll be right back. You're here listening to Health Made Radio. I'm with Dr. Ruth Richards. Welcome back to Health Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Dr. Ruth Richards. She's the author of Everyday Creativity and the Healthy Mind, Dynamic New Paths for Self and Society, which won a Nautilus Award, a book award, so it's an incredible book. It's been acclaimed in so many different ways. So I liked how like you're saying, that neither one of you knew what was going on, and all of a sudden the village was there. And it's not that you were mindful, but in your book you're then outlining that there is actually then where you can increase the likelihood for that aha moment, so you can kind of set the stage and improve the potential that will happen. Obviously, you can't control exactly what's going to happen, and that's a beauty out of this out of something comes out of chaos comes something. Right.
So if you'll humor me, I do like to use a popcorn model for this. And we can talk a lot more, if you like, about research behind the aha moment, because now much more is known about what the brain is doing during that time. And of course, this also involves our unconscious mind, which is a whole discussion in itself, because there are many things one might lump into unconscious mind. But still, how we can improve our odds. It's sort of like the popcorn, you put the corn in the popper and you turn on the heat and it starts popping, pop, 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 and so on. And we don't know when the next kernel will pop. But we do know that we can have them pop and even how to make them pop faster. So I find this useful because what we can do with the popcorn is we can turn up the heat and it will go faster. So it turns out there are a number of things by analogy sort of that we can do to turn up our own heat to make it more likely. And since you've been good enough to bring in chaos theory here, to bring us closer to the edge of chaos where things are happening and where we might see something new. And we can look at that in terms of process. So that would be the study if you'd like to hear about it. I even have a little thing your listeners can try. And also who we are, who we choose to be, really, because there are certain kind of qualities and traits that seem to go along more with being open to these kinds of experiences. And these aren't fixed. I mean, we can do a little more of this or a little less of that. So it's worth knowing about those. Those of us who have researched this for quite a while, and a lot of others studying creativity, look at it in terms of the 4 Ps. And you'll notice this book is organized by the 4 Ps, the first part. And then it gets into some, unusual topics and new directions. Alas, for creativity, relationship is not that usual, but it's here. And beauty and other things, including higher consciousness. But the 4 P's are creative product. So it's product, process, person, and press. The product, that's what a lot of people, they're interested in that, and that's kind of where it ends, too. It's like, how do I make a better something, a better widget? And there's nothing wrong with that, and we can talk about that. But let's say that we also turn the camera around, as we like to say, and look at who's doing this and what's happening. And so if we look at the creative process, that's pretty important. What do we know about that? How is this, turning up the heat in the popcorn popper, or making our, originality, because we're looking at the originality of everyday life, making that more apt to happen. The creative person, by which I mean everyone who's listening to this, has the potential to be a highly creative person. There are qualities we can discuss, and I can't emphasize enough that this is really about a way of life that we all can manifest, and that is probably much more friendly to our future than other ways. All right. And that finally, environmental press, which is sort of a strange word, but that's what's been used, of conditions that help creativity or don't. And that is beyond important. It really matters where we are, who we're with, what kind of support we get or don't. So think of a teacher who's really critical of the students. How many risks are they going to take to think of new ideas, or a boss, and so on. Yeah, or someone who's very supportive, a supportive parent, let's say. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I really appreciate, because most people, like you're saying, most people are just so focused on the widget of what should I produce, that they forget who they are as themselves, to prepare themselves as an individual, and then also then figuring out what kind of, like you're saying, the process, how should we achieve what we're achieving, and also how should we be able to set an environment to be able to be as successful as possible. So, I mean, it's really, most people get so focused on just one thing in that whole process, not recognizing the whole spectrum of what's needed. So I think that's amazing to be able to delineate that.
Well, I think it's helpful. And one thing about chaos and complexity theories, which are a useful frame here, the science of change and surprise, is that it really acknowledges something that's always been true. It just hasn't been studied as much as, supercomputers have made possible, and that is that everything is so interconnected, so that it really is really harmful to think we're these isolated individuals or beings or somethings that just do our thing and have no connection to anything else. That's not helping us with our environment right now either.
And that's kind of with the popcorn theory. If you keep everything safe, you have no heat, you have no pressure, then there's nothing that's going to happen, and you're keeping it safe. But if you then create, you turn up the energy, and which brings it, like you're saying, to the edge of chaos, then that is where things then take place.
I like this. We turn off the popcorn popper. That's good. Nothing's going to happen.
No.
Well, some people do that. They don't. I wouldn't say they do that necessarily on purpose. Sometimes they think they're doing a good thing. We don't want anything to change in the world. Right?
No,
yeah,
exactly. You want to be stable, and if you control the environment, then by exerting that control, you're reducing the complexity, which then reduces also the ability for something to evolve.
Absolutely. Okay. So, I mean, if you think of the opposite here, this is one thing about chaos and complexity theory, or just kind of nonlinearity, getting away from simple models, that there are many interacting factors here. So it's not like it's the more the better. The more the better, say aspirin, and it'll be lethal. It's not the more the better. And there are other examples of that have to do with some creativity and mental health issues, which I'm happy to get into. That's probably one reason for that award called the Arnheim. It's a delicate balance of almost like a symphony of parts of our mind and bodies and spirit, depending how you view it and what you're putting together, that create what seems like a magic that can be so special and can touch on some universal themes too, and so affect and help others. But anyway, I like the popcorn, the safe popcorn. Right? The safe popcorn goes nowhere.
Yeah. But you also, I mean, with, like you're saying, you have these complex systems, and they're also interconnected. And then you're talking in your book, I know, about the butterfly theory, where you have then this huge complex system, and you just alter the situation, or you alter the environment just slightly, and that can then create huge impacts due to it being such a complex and an extensive system.
And so I'm going to, let me make a little note here, but I'm going to mention one example of that, not to go into, but I think we're seeing more and more, that in the right place, not any old time, but in the right place, the right little change or piece of information can make all the difference. So if you look at an avalanche, which we usually don't want, the last snowflake kind of causes the avalanche, but it really isn't that. It's the whole history of what's happened on that mountainside and how all the snow is situated, and our minds aren't that different in a way. And so it may be that last piece of information or that last experience or something, kind of tips the balance so that suddenly we see something in the world in a whole new way. It kind of reconfigures our mind, for a more computer term. Yes. And so it's like the butterfly effect, and people have heard of, there's a movie called The Butterfly Effect, and Jurassic Park is based on the butterfly effect. And, it's always about this surprise event, but that's not any event. It's things getting to a certain point, the tipping point, where something small can make all the difference. So these days, epigenetics is becoming, which probably you know well from your kind of work,
yes,
is better known. Where our environment, we think we're running our lives right, right? So it turns out the environment is running our lives much more than we thought, that our DNA is there, but what parts are activated may have a lot to do with the conditions we're in. And there are some sad examples of that where people who are traumatized have certain molecular, molecules that sit on their DNA and get in the way of things that help them be trusting and happy in life, methyl groups and so on. But if you look at how little we know about this yet, there are probably so many ways that our environment can call to us, and that if we knew a little better, we're not victims of that. We create new environments every day in schools, at home, and so on, that we could be working with this in order to make conditions that would lead to a better world, to more altruism and caring for other people and so on. So I see all of this within, kind of creativity broadly defined when you look at this deeply interconnected, world that we're co-creating, badly or well.
Exactly. We're going to take a quick little break. You're listening to Health Made Radio. I'm here with Dr. Ruth Richards. She's the author of Everyday Creativity and the Healthy Mind. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Health Made Radio. I am here with Dr. Ruth Richards. She's the author of Everyday Creativity and the Healthy Mind, I should say, an award-winning book. So that is really the fascinating component that I think that a lot of people, they don't realize is the interconnection of all of us. What is the mind? What is the brain? What am I? Who are you? Am I different than you? Am I different than my environment? Am I my environment? And by able to understanding our place in the creation and universe, then to with that understanding, to then probably better understand the creative process and how we can then be involved in creating a better world, or be creating a better life, or finding more joy, finding more health. It's that understanding that you're really bringing out in your book in regards to creativity.
Well, okay, thank you. I thought I might just mention another example. Actually, I think the environment is so important. But think of the effect that a wonderful teacher can have. And I did actually want to mention one of my students who doesn't realize I'm doing this, who will get her PhD next week. Complete her dissertation defense. But she has worked with kids in a variety of settings, including at-risk kids in middle school, where she did some pilot work on what became her dissertation with college or junior college students. But here she, by creating conditions where young people could learn in more creative ways and not learn in a particular subject. In this case, this last case, it happened to be in a college geology classroom. It could be in any area. We're talking about a way of life here, not one particular way of being. And I can say more about what this creativity involves. But in any event, here are these young people suddenly seeing, oh, I could do more with my life. I could get a job where I'm doing some writing that's creative, or someone who is planning to become a teacher said, this is in this dissertation, oh, I can see so many new ways to teach. I'm going to take this and that course. So suddenly they are opening up their own environment to new exposures based on seeing their own potential in a new way, or seeing a potential where they didn't before. I say, I never knew I could be creative. So this is really common among people who think creativity is just about the famous artist or the famous playwright. And it doesn't exclude them, but it goes way beyond it. I did want to, kind of say a little more about this, like, what is this stuff, this creativity? Well, it's not really something that you never noticed. It may be something that many people have never named, like a fish in water. We take it for granted. The water's there, So that, but think about what we all do some of, and could we develop it more? So we all do a certain amount of guessing, or have hunches or intuitions, or, we can adapt, we can be flexible, we can try this or try that. And I think it's very common to do that in smaller ways, in larger ways. And there's a real basis here for what we're calling everyday creativity. Right? And it's not unknown, but how many people don't see some of these kind of qualities that they might use, say, talking to their child, or counseling a friend, or repairing their home, or landscaping their yard, or doing a great work of art,
because all of these are creative moments.
They are.
Yeah, so it's not just that you have to perform and be the best at work, or you have to make this magnificent painting or magnificent writing this magnificent song. Just like you're mentioning, your everyday activity, just hanging out with your kids, playing with them, it is a creative moment, and also an inspirational moment.
Oh, very nice. Well, and sometimes much more than you think. So it's years later that the child says to you, my daughter hasn't said this, but, it really, but she might still. It really was fun when we used to make up stories together. I don't know if you've done that with kids, at bedtime. So it's not just reading a book, you're going to make up this story or something else. So some of these can be the most amazing and transformative, even moments to someone else. because it's opened them beyond something that they thought was within their possibility. So if you look now at some of the qualities that may have more to do with the process or the person if it's always there, but if you're more aware, if we are more aware of these moments, let's say, we're apt to be more aware in general. Not like when my cousin and I were driving along the Oregon roads with my daughter, who I think was very aware of what was going on in her text messaging. We may, be more open to possibility, and that's one quality that's been really strongly linked with being creative. And it's not just, okay, if something new comes along, we'll see it. It's a little more than that. It's really being interested. It's liking it. It's wondering. And if you think about that openness, there's a real bravery there, too, because you don't know what you're going to get, as you put it. So, but you're willing to try. Well, that's good. That's really great, okay, compared to, the popcorn not popping, the safe popcorn. I really like that. Thank you. Right. Not the safe popcorn. There's a whole other part to this, or more than one, because it means willing to look at what's going on in our unconscious minds, and there's a lot of good stuff there. There are a lot of things maybe we don't want to know, too, but you're kind of willing to see what will come up. It means if you're being actively creative, going beyond what we call ego. There are different definitions, but this is the one where we want to see ourselves a certain way. So we've got this fixed image of ourselves, which isn't right anyway, because we're not fixed. We've changed from the beginning of this program.
Yeah, exactly. Like the saying is that that there's never the same river. Whenever you step into the same river, it's never the same.
Exactly right. So here we are in the flow of life. Like it or not, things are changing, and we are, right? So we don't look the same as we did when we were 5 years old. Unless we're 5 years old, unless a 5-year-old is listening. But there's also, I think this is just the evolutionary triumph, and I hope this is on the road to having more in the future, so we can live a little better together and, in this world. But that we, as a species, have really developed this ability to, first of all, have awareness, but then to have awareness of our awareness. We can be meta-aware. And once we can do that, we can start looking at what we're doing and decide whether we want to change it in any way. And now being creative means that we're, it's the originality of everyday life. If you want to make it visual, because most people have a lot of visual kind of intelligence, I guess, we are envisioning, we're imagining, we are seeing possibilities. And that's amazing. It's, organic life didn't always do that.
Can
wouldn't say there are.
No, can you expand a little bit on the meta-awareness? Because I think it'd be fun for the listeners to understand the difference between kind of the everyday consciousness and then the kind of the meta-consciousness, so to say.
Okay, let me put that in terms of a specific that is really can be linked to being creative and certainly to a spiritual path and other things like lowering your blood pressure, and that's mindfulness. And that has to do with the practice of being aware moment to moment and without judgment of whatever's going on in us, in our thinking, our emotions, and so on, in the world around us, as if that were separate, okay? Back to the first vignette, because we also determine what we see. But being aware of all that. So that's an important point in itself. But now when we are aware of that awareness, they say, oh, I was trying to meditate, but I kept thinking about X, or I was trying to count to 10. A good way to do it is to count your breath and go 1 to 10 and see if you can even get there. because we can be so easily distracted that, you get to 4 and you're off on some worry about what you better do later, right? And that's what we were doing driving along the Oregon road, was worrying about the other stuff. Once you have this meta-awareness is like awareness of awareness. So now you can say, wait a minute, I'm not really keeping focused on this thing I need to do. What can I do about that? So now we're not only seeing what's going on, we're seeing what we're doing, and we can imagine how could it be different. And that's such power there. Mm-hmm. To kind of change how we interface with life. And, of course, we've been talking about that all along. But it's worth seeing that and naming that this is another incredible potential that we have and that we can make use of to do even more. And, if we can talk about physical health here, because it's so powerful to see what say the relaxation response, going back to Herbert Benson's original book. Actually, he taught a class that was on the relaxation response when I was in medical school. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But here's something that has to do with kind of saying a mantra or something over and over again to yourself and relaxing. And it's amazing. So people's blood pressure goes down, their pulse, their respiratory rate, all of these things that are way too high in some people are better within minutes when they're doing that. Or lactic acid that comes from a lot of muscular tension, it goes down. So here are these physical kind of proofs of our mind-body connection and how much we can have some say over our physical health in the short run. So I did want to just mention that. And creativity is right up there in a number of ways that it can affect our physical health.
Yeah. I would assume as you become more engaged, and I know with patients, and I deal with a lot of cancer patients, and when they are more engaged in their health and take control of their own health and being more kind of the driver, the creative driver, rather than just being somebody that just do it to me, they have better outcome than if they are passive, just a passive recipient. So we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Health Made Radio. I'm here with Dr. Ruth Richards. Welcome back to Health Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Dr. Ruth Richards. She's the author of award-winning book, Everyday Creativity and the Healthy Mind. So going back to your description of the meta-consciousness and your consciousness and the power of the individual then to recognize that we are not just this person moving through life. We have a higher level of consciousness, and to be able to tap into that, and that way then tap into that creativity that exists. Since we are reaching beyond our physical brain, we're reaching into more the interconnection of everything that is around us, so that we open up an ability for everything that exists around us to communicate. And with our intention, we have then the ability to draw in that aha moment as we're that will then move us in through that creative process. Am I right when I'm saying these things, or?
Yeah, that sounds very good, and that there may be other ways we can go beyond our physical brain, but leave that for another segment here. I've also worked with cancer patients, although not as recently and probably not as much as you do, but I have found it very helpful to have people learn about visualization and healing, and for the person who doubts, there is good research on how blood flow can be constricted in certain areas, like you might want to do that before chemotherapy, and et cetera. through our mind-body connection. And it's just very powerful how that can work. And it gives, and even beyond doing that, it's just so empowering for some people to realize there's something they can do. They're not at the mercy of this really scary thing where there's nothing they can do. Of course, we're all going to die, and at some point it's much more about healing than about making certain things go away. But there are so many ways that we can be more active in our health, as people probably know from listening to this program. So there's one book that's actually pretty old at this point, but I think it's as good as Annie Martin Rossman's Fighting Cancer from the Inside. I have given that book to a number of people who've had cancer. So there are different ways to go, but I really appreciate your example there. And I also wanted to mention that the mental health issues, because I think there's a lot of bad press for creativity and also for certain conditions, because the whole thing about everyday creativity and mental health, or rather the risk for certain disorders such as the bipolar spectrum of disorders or the schizophrenia spectrum of disorders, things that we have looked at, including my colleague Dennis Kinney at Harvard Medical School and McLean Hospital, where I worked for many years. It really suggests this is about health. It's not about illness. But there are certain factors that run in certain families. And there's one chapter specifically on this in this book, so which will lead you to many other places if that's your interest. But there are specific factors with some, so-called mental conditions, which can occur in a whole spectrum of ways, not just one way, that do seem to make it a little bit easier to have some kinds of original thoughts. That's no guarantee of anything. And plus, there are many roads to creativity, so it's not necessary. But to recognize that coming along with some of these problems, which can be very heartbreaking and difficult, can be a silver lining to that cloud, as Kay Jamison put it in some of her writings about bipolar disorders and creativity. It's just another really important thing to be aware of, especially if you recognize that it's about health. It's about having a potential, these are all potentials unless they're developed, that under the right, balancing of conditions having to do with our, let's say, executive functions, or this used to be called regression in the service of the ego. And this is another ego now, the Freudian ego that's adaptive to reality. So where you are able, any of us, to relax in certain ways, which involves kind of altering our consciousness and our blood pressure, et cetera, not unlike meditation, to have more access to some unconscious kinds of thoughts, but also maintain this loose executive functions to use this in a way that's really adaptive to what you want to do in the world. It couldn't be healthier. And not just because, you may come up with the widget, as we were saying, the creative product, and hooray for that, but because it seems that being able to have that, it's like a fuller access to who we are and using different parts of ourselves, that this is able also to help us to be more integrated. And now I'm not talking about, you don't have to have such and such running in your family, anyone, that if we have what we've called deep sea diving, if you're able to really be less defensive and bring together more things, that aren't usually conscious in your mind, and to be able to kind of adaptively access this leads to healthy stuff. It can lead, if these are personally difficult things, to boost in immune function. It can lead to higher so-called working memory, what you have available to kind of remember and deal with things, because you're not working so hard to keep all this stuff from your mind, There's just so much to be said for creativity as a way of helping us to be more integrated and more whole within ourselves and with the world. But right now I'm talking about within ourselves. And there's research on this too. But it's not well known. Some people think being creative is some kind of little optional fun thing to do on a weekend. And we're talking here about something else, about a way of life that is much more opening and healing, and meanwhile can help us see many more alternatives in our lives. It can help us to be more resilient and to cope with conflicts and anxieties and all kinds of things that we all do need at one time or another. So it's not a super specialized thing only for a small group of people.
And yeah, so it doesn't seem, because always when you think of creativity, you think of an external event, meaning that I create something out there. But
right.
from what I'm hearing from you, that true creativity is actually creativity within yourself. So the process within, the process of creativity in itself is the life-changing, is almost the goal, and that is what changes our health, changes our consciousness, changes our relationship in the world, and as a side effect, we may be able to create other products externally, but that is not the goal.
Very nice. And if you've ever followed the work of humanistic psychologists like Abraham Maslow, who dealt with self-actualizing individuals, and this is all in this book, that was exactly how he looked at it, that the products weren't the point at all. It was really much more the way these people were living, and this is at a higher level of kind of personal creating and development, but we're also more involved. On the one hand, more play-like and spontaneous and childlike. On the other hand, more involved in things that could be helpful in their jobs, in their work, in so-called being values of truth, justice, beauty, and aliveness, interestingly enough. So this could be seen as a path, to a higher type of development. And I did want to read you one very short quote here from Zen Roshi, the late Zen Roshi, John Daido Loori, who wrote about creativity. And he said, the creative process, like a spiritual journey, is intuitive, nonlinear, and experiential. It points us toward our essential nature, which is a reflection of the boundless creativity of the universe.
Yeah, and that's I think that's the issue with a lot of people nowadays. You're always looking at well, I should say that there's that linear process. You do this and you do that and then so forth. Instead of recognizing that just the process of being, of just becoming aware and settling down and being and tapping into, what already exists, that becomes more creative and has more of an impact than always moving.
I think I could get off, since we probably don't have much time. We could talk about quantum mechanics and the actual and the various possibles, but there's a lot to be said for what we can kind of bring into the world that may be part of a larger archetypal sort of potential that's out there. I wanted to mention, though, because I can just see someone saying, who says creativity is so great? There are people who've created destructive weapons and who use creativity to rob a bank and, all that stuff. And true. And and this is not to overlook that, right? But that many of us believe, from the kind of things we've discussed here, that all else being equal, that living this way of life, which involves this open, aware, kind of visionary, and more or less beyond ego type of way of looking at the new and of welcoming it, being more authentic and spontaneous. This tends to be not the personality of someone who robs the bank, but it might have been back when they first did, or something. That all else being equal, this can really help us to become better people. And so there's a nice, not the book we're talking about here, but a nice collection called The Ethics of Creativity. I did a chapter for, and so did a bunch of other people, insightful people, 2014 book that looks at some of these issues. And, of course, some of that's in this current book, Everyday Creativity in the Healthy Mind. But, yes, this is, maybe we're missing the point here. Maybe this is about who we are, right?
Exactly.
And who we are together in the flow of life, and what does health really mean? You know, where are we going to go next? Interests me a whole lot. So we as a species.
Yeah, it's by looking within, you create without. And anytime you look without, you lose within.
Very good. Wow. Right. I had the privilege here. I'm not sure how much time we have. I'm kind of watching the clock here. But
I'd like we have the freedom, since with the radio show have a certain amount of time, but the podcast has we can do that a little bit longer. So I would love if you have you're chatting about like quantum mechanics, and I would love for you to kind of expand on that a little bit as well.
Oh, I will a little bit. Let me say what I was just going to say, that I had the privilege to go to Vietnam and to visit off and on for a week at this amazing monastery and nunnery there, and to meet each day with the abbot for a while and ask questions through a translator. And at one point, this is following up on your last point, I asked him, what's the I teach at Saybrook University and teach graduate students. And what's the one thing, that if I were going to take back one thing that would be most important to take back to the students? And he said, at least in 2 words in English, the 2 words were, look within. Mm. It's not like there's nothing happening in there. Everything is happening in there.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very important point. The point here about quantum mechanics, because there are many, the point I was making, but without really being an expert in this area, but is that there is the so-called wave function, which is probabilities, that there are all of these. And not to go associating this with any higher spiritual level automatically, by the way, but that there are all these probabilities, and now it's beginning to look like consciousness, which wasn't even accepted in some mainstream schools until recently, is central to what's going to happen when one of these many possibilities becomes actualized. So if you look at the double slit experiment, if you've heard about that, and you shoot these electrons through an electron can go through slit A or slit B, and so you'd think you'd have a bunch of darkening on this photographic film behind slit A and slit B, and you do, but more is happening because somehow there's a wave in there too, and these waves from one electron and another interacting with each other. So you get this whole kind of cool diffraction pattern that's on this too. And how does that happen? If you're shooting through these individual separate electrons like, bullets or something. And that's not what's something more is happening, and that there is this dual nature, and that on the one hand you have this probability wave, and then on the other hand, when something strikes the screen, it's going to be a little more definite, but only one of the many possibilities, of which obviously they're infinite, is going to happen, and it may be that it's consciousness itself. It's that some specific factor in determining a solution, let's say, is going to choose, not us, right? Exactly. And so here we have this outcome, but there could have been many outcomes. And where do all these many outcomes come from? I can't answer that for you, but then you have the potential to question, at least, whether there are some kind of archetypal sets of possibilities that are more likely than others in our greater reality. Now, there's something we can at least speculate about. So it's not like we're making up everything and nothing existed until we came along and thought of it. There may be some other stuff going on here, but that we may be able to be sensitive to that in a way which can open new doors in consciousness and that we can use to enrich our human experience.
Yeah.
And I did want to mention relationships, because that's another area that sometimes never comes up, as if they're not creative or not,
And like they're not important.
Or important, yeah. Who cares about that, right? If we can make our widget and sell it, right?
Exactly, yeah. That's important.
So, right, well, that may be very important, right?
Yeah,
but it's not the whole thing, right? So some of us will talk about relationships, and it's like a dance. It is a dance, sometimes a bad dance, So, but if our criteria for being creative in everyday life involve originality, so doing something new or unusual way, and then we add another one, which is meaningfulness. This doesn't mean to give it deep philosophical meaning, which may not become clear for years later, but whether it just communicates. So it's not random, it's not idiosyncratic. There's something here, though, that makes sense. So when it's shared, so it's new and it makes sense. Okay, well, no reason you can't apply that to relationships and, let's say, to a conversation. So, you're sitting with someone at a table, and I'm sure we've all played both parts in this one, right? You're sitting with someone, they're reading the paper, and you're trying to tell them this deep and meaningful thing that happened to you, right? And they're going, and then you turn to the next page of the paper. All right, well, there's a real kind of failure in empathic contact and communication, and it's very frustrating. And that's on the one hand. On the other hand, in a deep interaction with someone else, whether it's a partner or a child or a friend, there is something going on that is creating change once again in the people doing it, and wherever the conversation goes. If you're really listening to each other, it means a certain degree of empathy, of connection, obviously of listening. And if, let's say, it's a personal kind of talk between two people, it's really going to change each person. And actually, I'm thinking of, as I'm saying this, of speaking to someone who has cancer in that kind of situation where it's very difficult for them. And I'm picturing someone years ago, but who really wanted to go home from the hospital, and they were saying, you've got to stay for this and stay for that. And we succeeded in where she went home sooner rather than later. And that was so important to her. So she was being heard, and happily heard where she could have what she wanted and needed for her situation at that point, let me add. and with a lot of good people giving advice. But if everyone's changed in a situation like that, this was years ago. I still remember this very vividly, and the lesson for me, because I was an intern at the time doing liaison psychiatry, and it's like, we don't know everything here, and we don't know what's really important to this individual who at that point was dealing with something very end stage. And how do we all adapt to a situation in a way that will be the most healing, but where we're all going to grow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but being open in that situation, and instead of closed off, and then like seeing, being empathetic, and that allows you then to engage within that situation and engage in that dance of energy between individuals that then later on will then will grow. Will have a ripple effect for the rest of your life, and the people are impacted.
Very nice. And so maybe it had a ripple effect on the, as I think about it, on the last chapter of this book, which is kind of the section is what next,
Yes.
And it's like higher horizons. And included in there, among other things like, what are we going to do about artificial intelligence, is 3 examples of what you could say is something more involving consciousness. And the first is Abraham Maslow and higher, levels in humanistic psychology that aren't always discussed, involving the more esoteric and the more spiritual mind. And the last one, I'm going to come back to the middle one, is Walt Whitman. I don't know if you like Walt Whitman, but what an amazing poet. And he also was an amazing individual who was included in a book called Cosmic Consciousness, which was portraits of a number of people, in his case back at the turn of the century, I think is when he was interviewed for this, or much earlier, possibly. No, I think it wasn't long after Leaves of Grass. But anyway, where he showed a level of connection with something vastly beyond himself that comes through in his poems.
Yeah. And
I actually have the honor of being part of something here in New York. I'll be returning to California, but I'm in New York right now. And it's a yearly event where Whitman's Song of Myself is read by a series of people in its 52 parts. And it's just amazing. So Whitman was another example, but the middle one was a group. It was about group activity in business, no less. So here is an approach called Theory U. And this is like going back to the cancer patient in a way, but now we're dealing with a bigger situation of some major business decisions affecting many people, and what do we do next kind of thing. And in this context, here are people, and this is at MIT, Sharma, Peter Senge, and others have developed this over a number of years, starting with a very expansive view of presence. We're not just present in the present moment, but we're trying to be really aware beyond all of our conceptualizations and our fears of the future and our habits from the past, to just really have a more bare awareness of what's there and of what the future is bringing in. And now we're back more to the possibles than the actuals. It's like the Aikido master who's sensing where the energies are flowing and what's the best place to put in a little bit of energy, sort of the butterfly effect of Aikido. But here it's like, how can we, rather than impose our will on the future, which I think human beings are pretty prone to do a lot, how can we see where things are going in order to tweak here and tweak there and make things come out in the best way? And so it includes this to begin with. So it's more of a humility and an awe along with an empowerment to have an effect. That's one part. But another part that really impressed me is that these change makers are meditating together. And they're meditating together on the future and putting themselves in this kind of meditative space to use a different way of knowing, and a profound one, to help them see what some of the possibilities are. So that's number 2 out of 3. And I was just trying to pick some examples that would be different from what most people would think of. But too often we're not thinking about groups. We're thinking, what am I going to do?
Yeah, but like you're saying, when you're adding pool balls, you can calculate the pattern somewhat when you have one pool ball, and then if you add 2, then they start to become more random, and when you have 3, it's almost impossible to calculate. So the more energies you have, the more dynamic and the higher potential of creating something that does not really exist, creating something new, extremely creative, becomes tremendous.
Well, there you go, and here you have this whole group, and so since you brought up chaos theory, there are different attractors. I say, what's that? It's sort of the place a system settles down to, actually, in something called phase space. But anyway, if you have a pendulum, you can do the same thing you just did. So you have this pendulum and it's swinging, but you're going to not put any more energy into it. And so it slows down and then it stops. And the attractor there was a point. And while we're at it, death is a point attractor, and a lot of other things. But things may eventually stop. And that may not be very simple in the big picture, but as an attractor, a point attractor is fairly simple. So is a periodic one. If you had a pendulum that was making a perfect circle and you were putting enough energy into it to keep going, or you could say the Earth around the sun, but it's not a perfect circle, or a periodic perfect attractor. But again, that's simple. And now you have kind of 2 things. You have this one thing going around the other, right? Or there are other ways you could do it. But once you've got 3 of them, let's say you have 3 pendula, you've got infinite possibilities. It's just amazing. And now you have what's called the chaotic attractor, right? Or, well, that's probably the best word for it. And there's still a lot of solutions to this that are all in the same range. They're all bounded by a certain boundary. But there are infinite possibilities. Like what? Like us. Like all the different kinds of humans. Like what? Chaotic attractors are underlying so many phenomena. They're kind of like a shorthand for these different phenomena of nature. So you have, say, a tree growing, and it grows from a trunk to the branches, to the branchlets, to the twigs, to the new growth, and it keeps going in a way. We could talk about fractals here, but it's beautiful, and it keeps going, and there's an order to it, but nothing is exactly the same as anything else, and it's this chaotic attractor would be the summary for it, or clouds, or mountains, or many other things, our blood vessels, our brains. I mean, there's so much to be in awe of here rather than, oh, we know everything, right?
Yeah.
We're working on it, but we're a long ways to go. So here's, I like how you said, this group situation would increase the complexity hugely, absolutely. And when you get all of these consciousnesses working together and being aware in this greater interconnected cosmos of all the other factors that are impinging. So, I think a whole other advantage of all of this potentially is if people can get from it that there's a lot bigger world out there, and there are forces and factors and realms we scarcely begin to understand, but that many of us believe are benign and good, in the big picture. And, you can call it spiritual or call it whatever you like. But rather than thinking we can do everything and control everything, this is more like the kind of 20th century or 19th century science, the clockwork mechanism, and we can determine exactly what's going to happen. As with nature, wrong, right? There is so much going on, and we can only be in awe and rever it.
Yeah, and letting go, letting go of our ego in regards to it, and just observing, allowing it to happen, and then playfully be a part of it.
Very nice. So, and that may to some people feel like a loss because they're invested in this other worldview. We're really talking about a worldview here. And so what you mentioned, this book I'm co-editing with some other people. We're trying to bring chaos theory down to earth in a way that can be understandable to a lot of people in, say, the helping professions, the social sciences, and so on, in a more intuitive way. But one of our main objectives is about this change of worldview, which is happening, I think, but slowly. So that you still get in a lot of our sciences these very simple models that aren't how it works.
And I think one of the issues that we're seeing nowadays is that we are. You have children that are bound then to their phones or to their the different social media, and with that they're losing the complexity of the human interaction and also the stimulation of all the possibilities that exist in nature. All the different sensory stimulations that you have, and it just becomes one pathway of stimulation rather than all this complexity that exists within nature and within personalities and human beings.
Well, I think cell phones are an interesting. I started with cell phones. My daughter was on her cell phone, but at the same time, I'm really in awe of, say, my daughter and son-in-law now know all these things about IT that I don't have a clue. So they're the first people to ask, these young people. But that this is not to replace the world, right? There are ways that our technology can expand upon what we're able to do, and that's great. But this technological addiction you see is a whole other story. And one of our Saybrook students did something on that, looking at the diagnostic and statistical manual, and would someone who's completely addicted to their computer, cell phone, or Facebook, whatever, would they meet the diagnostic criteria? And the answer is yes. Right. Exactly. And they have withdrawal if they can't have it, and they want more and more, and so on. So that's not everyone, but it's something to watch out for. And I see how it happens. The average, in one study, the average person checks their cell phone every 6.5 minutes. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
I assume that's they're awake, not right.
I'm hoping.
Including.
I'm hoping.
But this is, you see it all the time, and so I was just at a spiritual retreat this last weekend, and one of the rules was cell phones off. I said, "Wow, is that a relief?"
Exactly.
No cell phones.
Well, Dr. Ruth Richards, it's been such an honor to have you on the show. You're what you're bringing out to the world, and what you're kind of bringing down, like you're talking about the chaos theory, and bringing it more into our social setting, our psychology, our mindset, our worldview. I think that is so sorely needed, and I'm very grateful for everything that you do.
Well, thank you. If you don't mind my just crediting this book that's almost done.
Absolutely, I would love to. And also let people know where they can find more information about what you do.
Okay, sure. The book that's almost done is for Oxford University Press. So they've been very good at doing both more accessible things as well as very academic things that have to do with chaos theory. And the editor-in-chief of our book is David Schulberg, and Shan Geisinger and I are both editors as well. And we have a really interesting group of people who have contributed chapters, and it's close to done, so I'm glad to mention that. If people want to look at my website, which is www.drruthRichards, that's all one word, no dots or anything, drruthrichards.com. You can find a number of things, which include 4 different books. I think you mentioned them at the beginning, or some of them, and articles and stuff. You will find eventually this broadcast and others, and you will find it's sort of right now it's blogettes. I just started with a little blogette, but there's a place where people can register and leave your own comments. And you have questions, please leave them, because I will take those very seriously and include them in future kind of blogettes or responses to what people seem to be interested in. So do take a look there, and you will find more information of many sorts if that's what you want, or a place where you can also be heard. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure. That's it for today. You're listening to HealthMade Radio. Remember to check us out at healthmade.co. Health is what you make it.